Trent Cotney and John Kenney are dedicated to helping the construction industry with legal business and safety challenges. Welcome to this week's episode of Law and Mortar.
All right.
Hey, this is Trent Cotney. I'd like to welcome everybody to another episode of Law and Mortar. As always, I've got John Kenney here. John, how are you doing?
Doing great. As always, it's great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to today's conversations. We're, marching into July at this point, and obviously a lot of big decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, relatively conservative bench, and you're seeing a lot of decisions that are calling into question some administrative action. There was a recent ruling that dealt with SEC administrative tribunals and talking about their ability to prosecute. And it's interesting, you're seeing the Supreme Court put more and more constraints on executive action. So, presidents, not only this administration, but other administrations have used executive orders for all kinds of things. And I think they've expanded the capability of that branch way beyond what it was intended for. So what you're seeing is the judicial branch, the checks and balances, kind of how things were created. You're seeing some cutting against that. And we've got a lot of other, potential decisions down the road that are going to be interesting to see, how that plays out. So, John, what's your take on all that? What's interesting is there's a lot of rhetoric surrounding it. They've turned it into a very political type thing where it's conservative versus liberal. Looking at it from a legal perspective, I kind of see it more as, strict interpretation versus a more liberal interpretation of what the law and the precedent was. I understand the rationale of most of these recent decisions as far as cutting against some agency action, but what are your thoughts on it?
Well, yeah, I see similarly. I mean, what we always get in the news is always left versus right, right versus left. But the decisions, when you really break them down, they do limit power, which is not always a bad thing. Actually, sometimes it's a very good thing. But I think, and again, I'm not taking this from the legal, so I'm taking this from what I'm thinking about on the business side. I think it kind of forces the people that are making these laws to begin with, and rather than give the ability for the agencies to interpret based on their expertise, I think you're going to find in the future now, the lawmakers may be forced to be a lot more clearer on what the intent of certain directives are. That's just my thoughts on it. That's would be ultimately a very good thing, I think, for businesses and people alike. Because one thing I always like about being in business is I will be able to succeed no matter where the goalposts are or the markers or the downs, but I need to know where they are and they can't move every time I go to do something. So I think, to me, that's breaking it down into my thoughts. I think hopefully this is where it'll go over eventually to more clarity and when things are being passed.
Yeah, it's hard to run any kind of business if the law is constantly changing, right? We need some continuity, at least, a few years of it. The other thing that was interesting is, the Supreme Court came out with a decision about qualified immunity for, the presidency and a lot of the actions that, whether or not Trump's actions, kind of fall within that qualified immunity. There was a big uproar over that decision. That decision really doesn't say anything other than what's always existed. There's a there's a limited amount of immunity that any government official gets with regard to performing its official function, right? So if I'm a president, or if I'm a governor, or if I'm a member of Congress, and I do something that is within my official capacity, there's some qualified immunity there. And if I act outside of that, then clearly there is no immunity. So even though there was a big deal made about that decision, there really wasn't anything that was that big a deal. Just kind of breaking that down there. And it's very interesting to see the press spin on it on both sides, because it is, we're seeing this politicization, try to say that fast 3 times, of, the judiciary. And I think that's kind of a bad thing because they were supposed to be somewhat above the fray when it comes to decision making. But going to be an interesting election this year, John. I don't, always avoid politics and religion, but got to tell you, this one's going to be one for the records. It's on both sides. There's some issues, so we'll see how that plays out. I want to turn to to some more positive news, and that is, you have really gained some huge recognition with your estimating courses and credentials. Every time I go anywhere, people are coming up to me and saying, hey, I saw John speak, and I think the thing that's interesting about the estimating training that you do is that it's not superficial. It's real in depth, and it's based on your, 45 plus years of experience in the industry. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, but it's starting to really come into clarity now. You've got a fantastic course that you're offering here in a couple of weeks. Why don't you kind of tell everybody where that's at and what they can expect if they attend?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in Lakeland, Florida, it's a local live 2-day class. There's people attending from as far away as Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, Chicago. So it doesn't matter where you live. You're willing to fly in for 2 days. It's a great course. I like the way you put it. I'll tell you the way I like to teach estimating. It's the same as the old proverb, teach a man to fish, he's going to be able to feed himself forever. That's the way I've taken the approach with the estimating and any other training I do. I want to show you how to do it and how to do it in real life situations, which is our industry. That's not theory. It's not, how could we do it? Think about it. It's showing you the nuts and bolts of how to be successful in what you do every day. So that's the approach I take, and I think that's why it's gaining. I don't want to say the word popularity. I'm glad you put it that way, but it's gaining the traction it is because you're gonna get when you leave in 2 days, you're gonna know everything you need to know to really buckle down and be a low slope, uh, as close as you can to be an expert. Everything still takes years, but I'm going to give you all the tools and all the knowledge that you need to go back and put it into your marketplace.
So I think you said that it was almost sold out or there was a wait list, but if someone was interested in attending, how do they get that information?
Easiest way at this point, I'd say just reach out to me via email, jkenney at Cotney Consulting, or you can go right to Cotney CG at Shopify. Go to my website and you can get to it and you can get all the information. But if you just reach out to me directly, I'll send it to you. We are close to being booked. I've got a waiting list there's a couple seats still left for this one. I had people that could not make this date that want to come to a future one this year. I don't have that date planned yet because I'm trying to coordinate it around Florida hurricane season and all the other good things and the industry events of the fall. But definitely reach out. I'm happy to get you hooked up.
Yeah, and Lakeland is actually a perfect spot. It's right in between Tampa and Orlando, so you can fly into either airport.
Yep,
It's really easy to get to.
exactly. A lot of hotels right within a
Yeah,
mile of where I'm holding it.
perfect location. So, it's interesting that you mentioned hurricanes. We had Beryl come through, and I saw this morning where 2,500 feet up in the air, they were tracking 180-mile-per-hour winds. And at one point it was up to sustain 165. I think it hit land at a 4 probably, but we're starting to see this more and more. We've talked about hurricane preparedness in past episodes, but from a contractor standpoint, this is just a great reminder. The storms are coming. They've already started early, and all we need is a strong one like this to hit landfall somewhere in the US, and everyone's going to get real busy real quick. So, make sure that you've got your supply chains open, make sure that you've got multiple distributors that can give you materials, get those contracts, temporary repair contracts, get the, TARP contracts. And here's something that if you're a Florida contractor, you need to know. There was a new statutory warning that went into effect July 1 that requires you to put a notice on there if you are selling stuff during a state of emergency. So that notice is required. I've got an article that's going to be published here in FRSA's magazine shortly on it, but make sure that that's part of it as well. Any other sage advice for our contractor listeners out there as storm season approaches, John?
Yeah, I mean, with storm season, you got to put a plan together. You just can't say, "Oh, I'm all good." You got to know how you're going to offload your jobs, how you're going to secure your jobs, how you're going to communicate with your people. What is your internal response to make sure your own company's safe? And if you're anywhere within hurricane areas, which is not just Florida, it's the entire Gulf Coast. And honestly, right now, it's probably all the way up through Virginia, if not higher, the way the storms are coming. You have got to be prepared. What happens if my roofing company gets hit? Everyone's safe, but I no longer have an operational building or my equipment to do. You need to think about these things because how you respond afterwards is how you're going to make money and how you're going to survive.
So good advice as always, John. It's now your favorite part. I am pleased to say that we've whittled down some of the questions, but we still have a big stack and we're still getting probably one or two a week that come in. This question is from Diane, and Diane's question, if I can summarize it, is basically if a storm hits and they don't have access to home office information, what's the best way to communicate with their salespeople and people in the field?
Well, hopefully, first of all, you got to be backed up on some sort of cloud. All your nothing should be anywhere served locally at all. That means nothing saved on local laptops or PCs. Everything should be in a cloud system backed up offsite. Okay. Then that means you can access it from anywhere in the world. You log in, you get your information. So that's the best way to be able to get your people to communicate is have that cloud backup, have that, even to have it there and have a plan in place. How do I get to it? I will tell you one thing you may want to look at, depending on the size of your company, is having some satellite phone backups.
Yep.
Because cell phones don't work and they may not work for weeks to come, depending on the area you're in. And it's a very cheap way of having it as an emergency backup.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I remember in South Florida, the cell towers got knocked down. If that happens, you're not going to have cell service. So the ways of communication were either, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, or sat phones. So you've got to have, cloud-based connection, and you got to have sat phones. So basically, you need to have some and be prepared. It is, you don't want to be figuring this out after a storm hits, is what is the message that we're sending to you right now, is take some time.
One last quick thing I'll throw in there. One thing that I always did on the contracting side is you should have an offsite meeting place that is nowhere near where the area could be that you're hit. You might have your salespeople pick a day afterwards, meet, who's not going to be able to make it, not make it. Your operations should be in a separate site to all together. And then that way your team captains are the ones with your satellite backups for total communication. At least this way, we got to have some sort of an offsite meeting place to get your foundation built back up from there.
Yep. Good advice, guys. Always be safe. Make sure that you're preparing in advance. We appreciate you guys listening to us, making us the #1 construction law podcast out there. Stay tuned for another episode of Law and Mortar coming up. If you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me out on social at Trent Cotney or email trent.cotney@arlaw.com. John, how can they get you?
Same thing. Look me up on social, John Kenney, and you can get me at jkenney@cotneyconsulting.com.
Great. Thank you, guys. We'll see you soon.
Take care now.